In the exclusive neighborhood of Sycamore Grove, behind the gleaming facades and perfect lawns, secrets hid in the shadows. And no one held more secrets than Jennifer Ashcroft. At 52, she was a powerhouse in biotech, a woman who had clawed her way to the top, building groundbreaking brain tech that could change the world. In her world, control was everything. In the boardroom, her voice was final. At home, every detail bent to her will. But Jennifer's grip on life was tighter than anyone knew. She had been through 2 failed marriages, each one leaving her more obsessed with control. Younger men fell into her orbit, drawn by her wealth and status, and she held them close. Too close. She kept them like trophies, always within reach but never free. To her friends, it looked like romance. To anyone who looked closer, it was more like a trap. Jennifer's obsession wasn't just a habit, it was her way of life. She was terrified of losing control, terrified that, if she let go even a little, everything would crumble. But as she tightened her grip, she didn't see what was coming. That need for power, that relentless hold on everyone around her, it would be her undoing. In Sycamore Grove, people were starting to talk. They could sense it even if she couldn't. Her perfect world was about to slip, about to spiral into something dark and deadly. Jennifer Ashcroft's story was a ticking time bomb, a dangerous game where the stakes were higher than she ever imagined, and she was about to lose. At 20, Ryan Breslin was stuck. His dreams had faded, replaced by a daily grind he couldn't escape. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, he'd hoped for a better life. But now, after dropping out of college, he was working endless shifts at a coffee shop, his future slipping further away with each passing day. Then Jennifer Ashcroft walked in, a force of power and elegance like nothing he'd ever seen. She didn't just catch his attention, she took over his mind. In her, he saw an escape from his bleak reality, a life dripping with wealth, power, and the kind of freedom he'd only dreamed of. He couldn't resist her pull, even if he had no idea what he was getting into. Jennifer saw him differently. To her, Ryan was a breath of fresh air, young, impressionable, and perfect for her needs. He wasn't just a companion, he was a project, someone she could mold into whatever she wanted. The thought thrilled her. She offered him glimpses of a life he'd never known, new clothes, fine dining, the promise of security. Ryan was hooked. The chance to escape his empty routine was too tempting to pass up. But as he stepped into her world, he felt something shift, a silent agreement hanging between them. He knew he was trading his independence for her luxury, and she knew she was binding him to her, one gift at a time. What neither of them realized was how dark their arrangement would soon become. Jennifer's hold over him was tightening, and Ryan's freedom was slipping away. This wasn't just a romance, it was the start of something dangerous. As their relationship grew, Jennifer's grip on Ryan became impossible to ignore. She didn't just want to spoil him with luxury, she wanted to shape him, mold him, own him. At first, her guidance felt almost nurturing, a powerful older woman helping a young man find his way. She encouraged his dreams, offered to pay for college, dressed him in designer clothes, and introduced him to her wealthy world. To Ryan, it all felt like a dream. But soon, that dream took a darker turn. Each gift, each favor, each invite came with invisible strings. Ryan began noticing how Jennifer had an opinion about everything: his clothes, his friends, even his taste in music. Every suggestion was a push, slowly erasing his identity until he was left only trying to be what she wanted. In public, she showed him off, a perfect, polished young partner in her elite circle. But in private, she controlled every part of him. If he even hinted at independence, a desire to see an old friend, an idea for a hobby, Jennifer's response was swift. She would remind him with a chilling calm of all she'd done to lift him from his old life, making it clear he owed her everything. One evening he mentioned an old friend. Her smile faded, replaced by a silence that hung heavy in the air. She quietly discouraged these connections, insisting his past didn't belong in the life they were building. Soon his friends were memories, his world reduced to the people she chose for him. Weeks turned into months, and Jennifer's affection became a cage, She monitored his phone, demanded details of his day, and insisted on his undivided attention. Every attempt he made to reclaim a piece of himself, just a moment alone, just a bit of freedom, was blocked by a cold reminder. Everything he had was because of her. What had once felt like a lifeline now felt like shackles. The luxury around him had become walls, each gift a link in the chain that bound him to her. And the deeper he fell, the more he realized he was losing himself. Jennifer's love wasn't just intense, it was consuming. By the time he saw the depth of her control, he was already trapped, a prisoner in a world he'd thought was paradise. Ryan's life shifted the moment he met Arya Thornton. It was a chance encounter at a museum, a place he'd started visiting just to escape Jennifer's suffocating grip. Arya was everything Jennifer wasn't, vibrant, spontaneous, with a lightness that pulled Ryan in from the very first glance. Where Jennifer's world felt like a prison, Arya offered freedom, a taste of something real. With Arya, Ryan felt alive again. She was an art student, full of energy, passion, and unburdened by status or control. She reminded him of who he used to be before Jennifer's web. There were no strings attached, no hidden motives, just a pure, raw connection. And every moment with her reignited the parts of him that Jennifer had worked so hard to bury. Soon, his meetings with Arya became his secret escape, each one a brief moment of freedom. He found himself drawn to the museum more often, seeking out those fleeting glimpses of her. And the more time he spent with Arya, the clearer it became. Jennifer's hold on him was a prison, and Arya was the key. But Jennifer noticed the change. She saw how distant he'd become, how his mind seemed elsewhere. She started asking questions, scrutinizing his every move. His sudden interest in art didn't add up, and her jealousy turned to suspicion. She watched him closely, sensing something slipping from her control. Despite her suspicions, Jennifer couldn't pinpoint Arya, but the crack had already formed. Arya's presence was driving a wedge in Jennifer's grip, making Ryan see just how trapped he really was. For the first time, he could see a life where he was free, where he made his own choices. And the more he thought about it, the harder it was to ignore. Ryan knew he was standing on dangerous ground. Arya had awakened something he couldn't turn off, but he knew Jennifer wouldn't give him up easily. Her jealousy was becoming something darker. The hidden connection was a ticking bomb, and he was running out of time. Jennifer's suspicions turned into an obsession to control every part of Ryan's life. The thought of him with someone as ordinary as Arya was intolerable. She couldn't let him slip away. Her anger pushed her to extreme measures, designed to trap him in her world with no way out. Hiring a private investigator, Jennifer soon had the proof she needed. Photos of Ryan meeting Arya at the museum confirmed her worst fears. The confrontation was ice cold. She presented the photos, her piercing stare demanding answers. Ryan tried to brush it off, but Jennifer saw through every excuse. Her grip tightened. First, she cut his access to money, limiting him to a strict allowance she controlled. She tracked his every transaction, turning each dollar he spent into a reminder of his dependence. His social life became a memory. Only her approved friends remained. She filled his calendar with events and commitments, so he barely had time to think, let alone escape. Every part of his life was now under her control. But Jennifer had one more weapon. She'd uncovered a secret from his past, a hit and run he'd tried to forget. Calmly, she mentioned it one evening, a casual reminder of the power she held. If he thought about leaving, she'd destroy him. The message was clear. He was hers, bound by the threat she'd just unleashed. Jennifer's blackmail became a constant shadow. Every time he thought of Arya, she reminded him of what she could do. He felt caged, desperate to escape, but powerless. Each attempt to assert himself only made her tighten her hold. Jennifer's manipulation went even further. She started faking health scares, asking for his help during her fragile moments. She acted as though she was the one who had sacrificed everything, twisting his guilt, making him believe he owed her. She made him feel like wanting freedom meant he was abandoning her. Under her relentless control, Ryan felt his spirit break. The spark Arya had ignited was gone, replaced by a numb compliance. He was trapped, his sense of self slipping away a little more each day. Yet deep down, a small angry flame refused to die, a silent rage and desperation. He knew he couldn't keep going like this, but Jennifer's grip seemed inescapable. With every act of possessiveness, Jennifer was pushing him closer to the edge. Each day, Ryan felt himself inching toward a breaking point in a life that no longer felt like his own. The tension between Jennifer and Ryan had reached a breaking point. Her sweet gestures were gone, replaced by relentless control and suspicious glares that kept him on edge. Jennifer had locked down every part of his life, his money, his friends, his freedom. Ryan barely recognized himself anymore. He felt like a ghost drifting through her world, stripped of anything he once loved. Each night at dinner, he could feel Jennifer's piercing stare, reminding him of the strings she held over him. The life she'd given him, once dazzling, now felt like a cage, its golden bars tightening around him. Whenever he caught his reflection in the mansion's polished surfaces, the emptiness in his own eyes shocked him. He was trapped, barely existing. One evening, they attended a gallery opening filled with Jennifer's elite crowd. Ryan forced a smile, silently counting the minutes, desperate for an escape. And then he saw her, Arya. She stood across the room, glowing in the soft lights, her face warm and alive. Seeing her was like breathing for the first time in months. Arya represented everything Jennifer had stolen from him: joy, freedom, a life without chains. Unable to resist, he slipped away and approached Arya, just for a moment of peace. She looked at him with concern, noticing the strain in his face. In her presence, he felt like himself again, the person he had almost forgotten. But the peace shattered the moment he noticed Jennifer's eyes on him from across the room. Her face was a mask of fury, a warning of the storm waiting for him. Back at the mansion, the silence was suffocating. Then, as the door clicked shut, Jennifer unleashed her rage. She demanded answers, accusing him of humiliating her, of throwing everything she'd given him back in her face. Ryan, exhausted, snapped back. He told her the truth, that he couldn't live under her control anymore. Her possessive love had turned his life into a nightmare. Jennifer's eyes narrowed, her fury deepening. She reminded him of everything she'd done, twisting his desperation for freedom into a betrayal. When that didn't work, she dropped her voice, leaning in close. She whispered his darkest secret, the hit and run she'd uncovered, the leverage she'd been holding over him. One word from her, and his life would be over. Her tone was ice cold, each word a knife cutting into any hope he had left. That was it. Something inside Ryan snapped. The fear that had held him hostage turned into a burning rage. He told her he was done, that he would rather face anything than live like her puppet. But Jennifer's response was immediate and brutal. She grabbed a letter opener from the table, her hand shaking with rage, her face twisted and unrecognizable. Ryan's instincts took over. He grabbed her wrist, struggling to stop her. They stumbled, tension building as she fought him. Then suddenly her foot slipped. She fell back, and time seemed to freeze as she hit her head on the marble fireplace. The sickening sound echoed through the room. For a moment, everything was still. Ryan stared in horror at Jennifer's motionless body, the realization sinking in like a weight. She was gone. The woman who had trapped him in her obsessive world was dead, lying lifeless in the home she'd used to imprison him. Panic flooded him as he processed what had just happened. Without thinking, he turned and fled, leaving behind the life that had almost destroyed him, his mind racing, fear and shock mixing with an overwhelming, haunting sense of freedom. Early the next morning, Jennifer's housekeeper arrived, her footsteps echoing through the empty, polished halls. But when she entered the living room, she froze in horror. Jennifer's body lay motionless by the fireplace, a dark bruise on her temple. The silence was chilling, shaking. She dialed 911. Soon, flashing police lights cut through the quiet elegance of Sycamore Grove, marking the end of Jennifer's reign over the perfect life she'd controlled so tightly. Detective Lydia Blackwell arrived on the scene, her sharp instincts alert. As she walked through the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was no accident. Everything seemed too neat, too carefully set. Jennifer's reputation as a powerful, controlling figure wasn't lost on her. Blackwell suspected this might be more than a tragic fall. While examining the scene, she spotted subtle signs of a struggle: the broken glass, a faint blood smear, tiny clues that hinted at a violent encounter. Surveillance footage provided her next lead: a clip of Ryan looking tense and shaken, slipping out of the mansion shortly after the time of Jennifer's death. Ryan quickly became the prime suspect. Within hours, the media erupted with accusations, labeling him as a gold digger who took advantage of Jennifer's wealth. Headlines painted him as a manipulator, twisting the narrative into a scandalous tale of greed and betrayal. The public was quick to judge, branding him as the cold-blooded villain behind Jennifer's death. But Detective Blackwell wasn't one to accept easy answers. As she dug deeper, she uncovered a different side to the story. In Jennifer's private files, she found detailed notes tracking Ryan's every move, blackmail threats, and records of her obsessive surveillance. Each discovery painted a picture of Jennifer's need for absolute control, a twisted obsession that went beyond love. Interviews with friends and former employees revealed more disturbing details. They described Jennifer as someone who didn't just want loyalty, she demanded submission. Ryan, they said, was less of a boyfriend and more of a captive, held by her wealth and power. Blackwell began to see him not as a villain, but as a young man trapped in a web of control, desperate to escape. As more evidence surfaced, the public's perception of Jennifer began to shift. The woman they'd admired was now seen in a darker light, her once glamorous life twisted into a tale of obsession and manipulation. Blackwell realized the tragic truth: Jennifer's need to control had led to her undoing, blurring the line between victim and villain. The case took a dramatic turn when Arya Thornton, Ryan's secret confidant, bravely stepped forward. Shaken and filled with guilt, Arya shared her private messages with Ryan, revealing Jennifer's cruel hold over his life. The text showed Ryan's desperation, his pleas to escape Jennifer's control, and the fear that kept him trapped. In her testimony, Arya described their fleeting museum encounters, moments where Ryan had tasted a freedom he thought he'd lost forever. To him, Arya wasn't just a friend. She was his last connection to a world without manipulation. Arya's words exposed Jennifer's dark side, sending shockwaves through the investigation. She explained how Jennifer had tightened her grip on Ryan, leaving him helpless, like a prisoner in her gilded cage. Detective Blackwell saw through Arya's account a stark contrast: Arya's warmth and compassion versus Jennifer's icy possessiveness. The story shattered the public's perception of the relationship, revealing Ryan as someone trapped and tormented. As news of Arya's testimony spread, public opinion split sharply. People who once saw Ryan as a heartless gold digger began to see him as a victim, caught in a web of toxic power. Social media exploded with sympathy for Ryan, with some calling him a pawn in Jennifer's twisted game. But not everyone was convinced. Some insisted that, no matter what, Ryan was still connected to Jennifer's death, and they demanded justice. The debate raged online and in the streets, dividing people over who was truly at fault. Arya's decision to speak out forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about power, control, and the blurred lines between victim and villain. Her courage lit a fire under a case that was no longer just about a tragic death. It was now a symbol of the dangers of obsession and the high price of control. The tension in the courtroom was thick as everyone held their breath for the verdict. When the judge announced Ryan's conviction for manslaughter instead of murder, a wave of shock rippled through the room. The court acknowledged the mountain of evidence detailing Jennifer's emotional grip on him, her relentless control, her manipulations, her blackmail. Ryan was sentenced to 5 years in prison, eligible for parole in 3. For some, this felt like justice, a rare recognition of how far Jennifer's obsession had pushed him. For others, it was a slap in the face. Jennifer was dead, and they believed Ryan should be punished more severely. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Supporters rallied behind Ryan, painting him as a man who had been suffocated by a controlling, powerful woman who saw him as nothing more than a puppet. For them, the sentence was a glimmer of fairness in an otherwise tragic story. They argued that Jennifer's twisted obsession had left him trapped in a psychological cage. His sentence, they claimed, wasn't just a punishment, It was a strange kind of release from the life Jennifer had forced upon him. But not everyone was sympathetic. Critics believed Ryan had escaped justice. They argued that whatever Jennifer had done, she didn't deserve to die that way. They wanted the court to punish him harder, convinced that he had used public sympathy to dodge the consequences. For them, Ryan's victim persona was just a mask, a ploy to win leniency. Detective Lydia Blackwell couldn't shake the case from her mind. She knew that beneath the legal arguments and public opinions lay a darker truth about control and power. Jennifer had crafted a prison of luxury and wealth around Ryan, only to become a prisoner herself, unable to escape the obsession she had built. In the end, she saw this case as more than just a tragic accident. It was a chilling warning about the destructive power of manipulation. Jennifer's life had ended in the very web she spun, leaving invisible scars that would haunt Ryan long after his sentence was over. For those who followed the case, Jennifer's story lingered as a stark reminder of the thin line between love and control. Ryan's freedom, limited though it was, would be haunted by memories of Jennifer's iron grip. And the unsettling question lingered: when does love turn into something darker? Want more stories of twisted love and deadly obsessions? Click the next video on your screen or subscribe to our channel to dive deeper into gripping tales of passion turned dark.